Welcome to Far Out with Faust. I'm Faust Chicho, and today I'm sitting here with Dr. Melissa Sell. A little bit about Melissa. She is a doctor, she's a teacher, she's a speaker, she's also a coach, and she works with people individually. And she has a process of helping people understand what is known as the five biological laws of German New Medicine and how to relate them to their life. And her specialty is in the art of perceptual alchemy, which is an amazing word. I think it should be required learning, but perceptual alchemy is the ability to transmute and perceive all circumstances as being for your greatest good, of the most benefit to you. So, Melissa, we're going to get into all that. Thank you so much for beaming in. It's so great to have you on board.
Oh my gosh, thank you so much. And that intro was perfect.
Awesome. Thank you. I told her before we started, I said, if I screw up anything on the intro, just let me know and we'll fix it. But yeah, so, you were a chiropractor, right, Melissa? I mean, you spent a few years working as a chiropractor.
Yes, I started in the chiropractic world right out of high school. That was my first, really my first job was working at a chiropractic office. And I just got so turned on by the lifestyle and the health and just the vibrancy of seeing people come into this world. And, my whole life was changed by holistic, just living and learning about um, detoxification and the dangers of vaccination, and just this whole world I entered in chiropractic was incredible. And I went to chiropractic school and graduated in 2012. And I practiced full time in that model for 4 years full time, and then I went part time for a while.
Excellent. I mean, it amazes me. I always feel like chiropractors work on and are in such proximity to, what is generally known as chakras, or energy centers on people. And I just feel like, when the right person becomes a chiropractor, there's this kind of like supernova of an activation that happens in them. I don't know how else to explain it. Like, I think some people who come from chiropractic sometimes become some of the most profound individuals. And so when I found out you're a chiropractor, I was like, huh, another chiropractor who has, seen the light, so to speak, or expanded beyond that. So it was interesting.
Totally. Yeah. Chiropractors, they're cool. A lot of them are pretty normal or not cool. A lot of them are really cool when, and I think it has to do with like the deep philosophical nature of like the origination of chiropractic. Like D.D. Palmer and B.J. Palmer, the originators of chiropractic, were really interesting dudes. B.J. Palmer wrote volumes upon volumes of books of these, they're called the Green Books, and they're philosophical. And he just, in these books, I would just get lost in these books because he would talk about the brilliance of the human body and the intelligence, the innate intelligence inside of the human body, and how the mind of man, the educated mind of man, comes along and thinks it knows something about the human body that built itself, that's constantly building and rebuilding itself every single moment. And the arrogant, educated mind comes in and says, oh, we can take this out and add this in. And something about that, just, it spoke to me at such a deep, primal, existential level, where I'm like, yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me. And so that's in the chiropractic world. Not everybody is in that deep philosophy, but the ones that are and that see that we're working, BJ Palmer said, we work with the subtle substance, from which everything is made. And that's this innate intelligence. And so that's what really turned me on about chiropractic, was the philosophical roots.
Yeah, it's so fascinating. I always wondered how chiropractors got this. I don't know how to explain. It's like they're like slightly looked down upon by some people in the medical community. Not all people, but they're looked on like what they do is not fake, but there's just this something derogatory about how many chiropractors are viewed, particularly like in mainstream medicine. And then of course that spills over to the opinions spill over to the patients because they worship the doctors. And learning about your background and then hearing you speak about it really helps me tie together where that comes from. I mean, think about that philosophy and how it does not in any way, shape, or form mesh with what allopathic medicine and doctors learn and teach and practice, you know.
Totally. And that opinion and that perspective was intentionally crafted by the American Medical Association. They literally had a committee called the Committee on Quackery. Like the reason that people say, oh, if you want to see something funny, go look at my reviews on Facebook. They're horrendous. I have like a negative review because a few posts, people will just come and, oh, you're a quack, you're not a doctor, blah, blah, blah. And I find it so funny because the people who call me a quack, who think I am spreading pseudoscience or lies or whatever, literally the idea of calling an alternative health practitioner, specifically a chiropractor, a quack, that was propaganda that was literally planted into the cultural consciousness. They paid like TV shows and stuff to denigrate chiropractors.
That's right.
To build this image. And so it's like, you have no idea the depth of the deception that you have bought into by even calling me a quack. You don't even know where that comes from.
Oh, you are speaking my language, Melissa. My God, you're speaking my language. People really don't. I mean, so out goes chiropractic, gets a bad name, drags them out goes midwifery. What happens now? The business of being born is, ushered in. And so now we have circumcisions happening some over 50% in some cities. I mean, we can go on and on about what this propaganda has accomplished and what it has, really decimated as far as health goes. But it wasn't just chiropractic, right? It was midwifery. It was a homeopathic, anything that threatened what you could go for and pay for at a hospital became a target of this propaganda machine, and people don't even know. People don't even realize it.
Exactly. And then we get into, kind of my personal evolution that's brought me to Germanic healing knowledge, Germanic new medicine. And that is just, it is no wonder, Dr. Hammer, a lot of people will, look him up on Wikipedia and say, oh, well, he had his license taken away and he believes these crazy things. And, oh, well, this isn't reputable at all. And it's like, look deeper, look at the story, his thesis, this thing that he discovered, the things that Dr. Hammer discovered, what I now base all of my work on, and that I see as evidence in my own body and everyone I've ever spoken to. Dr. Hammer, he discovered these natural laws. They've always been around. The body has always worked this way, and he recognized it. And so when something is a biological law, it needs to be recognized by the schools. It needs to be recognized and taught in the schools. And the University of Tübingen, that he presented this thesis, they will not even entertain it, because they looked at it, they knew it was true, but they also knew the logical consequences if we validate this thesis, if we accept it, if we even acknowledge it, we're done. Because it changes literally everything that we thought we knew about health.
In an ideal world, well, I'm going to just say it because this is my show and it's called Far Out with Faust, and this is what I believe. But on many worlds, there are systems of integration that is perfectly understood and acceptable. All knowledge and philosophy, especially when you're talking about a physical body in 3D and how best to take care of it, is accepted and assimilated, right? This is just common sense. Why would you put all your eggs in one basket when you could have so many baskets? Because there may be solutions in all of them, and we're talking about the health and evolution of a species. So I want to go back to what you're talking about, but so just for our reference, the origins of German new medicine. And let me just say this, Melissa, I was reading so much about you, but every time I read about you, it was, you're so closely attached to German new medicine that I thought you were German. I really got it in my head that I was going to talk to you and you're going to have a German accent. And I was like, so when I started to, listen to your interviews, I was like, oh, she's not German. Duh. I was like, God, that just shows you how programming works. Your name was always so close to German new medicine because you become, a practitioner of it. And that I was like, oh yeah, she must be German because it says it right there all the time, But for our listeners, Dr. Hammer was the person who put forth and would you say created the German new medicine and the practice of it, the concepts of it? What
Well,
would you
he
call it?
discovered, yeah, he discovered this natural science, these five biological laws, and he mapped out the human body. And he made these connections between the psyche, the brain, and our organs. And he found that disease, what we have labeled as cancer, heart disease, psoriasis, an infection, these processes that are going on in the body, what we have forever thought of as wrongness. This is a bad thing. This shouldn't be happening. These cells shouldn't be replicating. This place shouldn't be inflamed. And so what allopathy does is comes in, sees the symptoms, and seeks to remove them, to remove the organ, to, if the fever's high, we bring it down. If the digestion's slow, we speed it up. If it's going too fast, we slow it down. That's allopathy. We try to reverse whatever it is that the body is doing. But that comes from a deep misunderstanding of the human body, because we assume and we think of the body like we think of a car. This is this mechanistic model where we see, oh, it's got parts and pieces. Sometimes things break down. Sometimes it wasn't put together right in the first place, and there's, errors. And so we look at the body like a car, instead of this extremely intelligent, highly evolved organism that has millions of years of adaptation wisdom programmed inside of it. You would not even be here if it wasn't for this intelligent programming. And so Dr. Hammer, through his own personal tragedy, his 17-year-old son was shot and didn't make it. 4 months he tried to survive and ended up dying in his father's arms. And then Dr. Hammer developed testicular cancer. And he had suspected a connection between trauma and cancer, but this was, very real in his own experience.
Because he was healthy at the time, and he was like, this is, he just had an intuitive knowing that this had to have something to do with his son's murder, right? Is that the way the story went?
Totally. Yeah. And so he got to test, he got to see it firsthand on himself, and then he got to speak. He was heading an oncology unit, so he had access to patients, and so he spoke with them. And he started noticing themes. He started noticing patterns, that every time a man had testicular cancer, previously he had a traumatic loss. Every time there was someone with a lung tumor, they had a death right conflict. Every time a woman had a breast gland tumor, she had a nest worry. And so it wasn't just stress causes something to go wrong in the body, and the body starts screwing up and makes cancer. That's an idea that a lot of people have about the development of cancer. But what he found was that it's not just stress. It's something shocking and isolating, and it's of a particular nature. And depending on the particular nature of the shocking thing that affects you, that impacts you in that moment, a different biological program is activated. And this biological program is an intentional adaptation intended to help you to survive and reproduce. And so that's the whole game of life. We are programmed with this life principle. It is the life principle that causes us to be alive, that seeks for more life. It's not the body parts, because what's the difference between a live body and a corpse? All the parts are the same, all the chemicals are the same, all of the physical matter that's there is the same, but the life spark is not there. It's the life within us that is adapting and healing. And so as long as you are alive, your body is seeking homeostasis and balance. It will adapt to allow you to survive and reproduce. And so that's what he found, was that when we have shocking conflicts, the body automatically sets off these biological adaptations to help you survive, whether it's more lung cells to absorb more oxygen, more digestive cells to produce more juices, to better digest something. There's always a meaning behind the adaptations that are happening.
Right, and he called those SBSP, which means significant biological special program or programs, right? I mean, that's what you're referring to. And he said that we have, what's happening are these adaptations, and it's, the body is always trying to get well. I mean, it's doing a trillion things every second, and in a very real sense, the body only knows how to try to heal. It doesn't always succeed, but the body doesn't know how to be sick. It just knows how to continuously try to heal. It doesn't always have what it needs, and it's not always on the right course to do that. We know people experience, a lot of different degrees of sickness, but, what you're saying, and as I learned more about German New Medicine, I was like, it really kind of fits, but I'm still fascinated by the science behind it, and how because he got really specific with a lot of things, and that's, I'm excited to get into them with you, as far as the psyche brain organ correlation, and the 5 biological laws, and how he goes into them. Can you talk a little bit about, because I was really blown away by how specific he got, and I've heard you go into it, as far as like, can you give an example of like some of the things that were consistently mapped out, and like, where they were found then in the brain and then in the body, and the trauma?
Totally. Yes. And that's the cool thing, as I've been learning more and more and getting in contact with people who knew Dr. Hammer, and he was, up until he died, he was always looking to better understand these connections, and the ones that he has mapped out have been accurate in every single case. And so an example, let's see, cervical cancer. So cervical cancer, there's this, what do we think? What does the average person think? Cervical cancer, what it might be caused by a virus, it might be transmitted somehow, it might be familial if it runs in the family. Nope. Dr. Hammer found it's not because of a virus. It's not because of a genetic predisposition or a problem. It is because an individual female experiences a sexual frustration conflict, some type of sexual separation type of conflict, wanting sexual contact, not wanting sexual contact, wanting to get pregnant, not wanting to get pregnant. Something of this nature is going on with this person. An example that I spoke with someone who was in a relationship they didn't want to be in anymore. Mm-hmm. And they didn't want to be in this relationship, and they were struggling about, all of the things, but if you're in a committed relationship or a marriage, and what are people going to think? How am I going to find someone? All of the things. And so this person waited for years. He waited for years, and then finally did it. Finally, said, we got to end this thing, goes through the divorce, like signs the papers, and then starts bleeding profusely. Oh dear. And so when we start bleeding profusely, we go to the doctor, and the doctor does tests, and then it's like this whole big kind of scary thing is happening, starting with the bleeding. That's scary in and of itself. And then you go and you get tested, and they say, oh, suspicious cells and this, and then you get a diagnosis. And so that's kind of this whole world of the fear-based model of, what is my body doing? Is my body doing something wrong? Body was not doing anything wrong. Body was doing something very right. And so Dr. Hammer discovered that this type of conflict, it impacts. So when she starts realizing this, she's isolated in that moment. What am I going to do? That's one of the characteristics of a conflict shock, is it's very isolating. You feel all alone. You don't know what to do. In that moment, it catches you off guard. And so that's what initiates the biological program. And so, the cervix, the type of tissue, is controlled from the cerebral cortex. And so there's going to be an impact in the brain that if this person has a brain scan, you're going to see it on there. There's going to be an impact in the brain. And then on the tissue level, there are adaptations taking place. And so the biological purpose and meaning of this particular program related to a sexual frustration, sexual separation conflict, is there is tissue loss during the active conflict, because the body only doesn't understand not wanting to have a child. The body just wants to have more children. And so if you're experiencing a sexual frustration, the body is experiencing that as, oh no, it's of great importance that we get pregnant right away. And so the cervix, it widens. And so normal, you've got your normal cervix. And then when you're in this type of conflict, there is erosion, there's widening of the cervix. And so what's the purpose of that? Well, more space for the stuff to get up where it needs to go in order for baby making to happen. And so the whole time that this person is in a conflict with this erosion, it's happening. This adaptation is taking place. Typically, when you're in conflict, most of the time you're not experiencing any symptoms. Sometimes some conflicts you can have chest pains or certain indications that you are in conflict. Definitely cold hands and feet. You often will wake up at 3 a.m. and be wide awake because you're preoccupied. The body wakes you up to so that you can resolve this conflict. And so, yeah, once you resolve the conflict, once you make the decision, you get out of the relationship, you're finally free, then the body says, oh, okay, the stress is gone, the frustration is gone. Now we have to restore and rebuild the tissue that was eroded. And so when a person starts having symptoms or bleeding, or you're experiencing swelling, fatigue, that means your body has shifted into parasympathetic and it's restoring and healing that tissue. But
Mm-hmm.
that's when, like I mentioned, the person goes to the doctor and gets the diagnosis, which can start a new conflict of, am I going to die?
Oh my
What's
God. Yeah.
happened? And so you can see how this is perfectly logical. It's biological,
Yeah.
why this whole thing happened, why these tissue cells, why they go in there and they say, oh, it's cancer, oh, it's aggressive. All that means is that you had an intense conflict, a lot of tissue loss, and now there's a lot of tissue rebuilding. You can think of it like a scab. This
Mm-hmm.
is tissue restoring. We look at it, we say, oh, these cells are replicating out of control, it's cancer, we've got to remove it or radiate it, or put
Yeah.
chemicals on it to get rid of it.
Yeah. And then it's a downward spiral, and usually a rabbit hole very big that people go down when that happens, when they get the diagnosis.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important. And that's why, when I found out about GNM, and it was 2017, and I was like, how have I never, ever heard of this before? How did
Yeah.
I know this? Because I was working off of a very different model. And I like I said, I love the chiropractic model. I love holistic and alternative health and wellness, but still in that model, they do not have the accurate picture of what cancer is and why it happens.
Yeah.
And so we think it happens because I ate too much inflammatory food, or I'm not eating the right diet, or I don't have the right supplements, or there's something that I did that I need to now make up for. And so people will go on like crazy cleanses and fasts and juicing and all sorts of stuff because they think that that's the reason that the cancer formed. And so that ideology, though, gets you into another rut of like holistic health rabbit holes of trying all the things and all the different diets and the carnivore and the vegan, and so you're chasing after some type of external answer because there's this idea or belief that the cancer formed because of some error, some kind of wrong happening within the body, damage to cells, damage to something, toxins causing the cancer, when that's not the case when you understand the 5 biological laws.
Right. I mean, but you do admit that it could, like, if so, for example, if a person smokes their whole life, that amount of carcinogens hitting the lungs, and then they develop lung cancer, and are using literally 10% of their lung tissue that's left, that, I mean, so I guess how does that fall into this system? I mean, that's like, kind of a simple accounting. I mean, obviously, I know there are people who smoke and never get cancer, but there are also people who smoke and get emphysema and then lung cancer, and like, I'm just using that as an example. But how does that fall in?
So smoking is poison. I mean, it's not good
Yeah.
for the body, but it does not cause cancer. And so it is not a carcinogen in the sense that smoking causes cancer. Because if that were the case, like you said, everyone that smokes does not get cancer.
Yeah.
And so because that's not true 100% of the time, that's the thing about like laws and biological laws, like the things like with the sexual frustration and the cervical cancer, it's always going to be this way. If someone has cervical cancer, they had a sexual separation conflict, and there's going to be an impact in the brain 100% of the time. There's never going to be an exception to that. And that's
And
like that's how Dr. Hammer is like, these are laws. This is consistent. The carcinogen theory isn't consistent because
kind of
someone
like the
can
germ theory.
not consistent. And so a
Yeah.
person can be exposed to a germ or a toxin and not develop what you would think they would develop. And so because there are those exceptions, that makes those theories and not laws.
Yeah.
And
For sure.
so a person who has lung cancer, who also smokes, we know that that person had a death-right conflict. And now they also have a ton of poisons in their system that their body, definitely is taxing on the body, because the body is always doing its best to heal and to, refresh itself and make new cells. And so if there's constantly poisons coming in, that makes that task more arduous, more difficult. So the body has to use up more resources. It's more depleting, but it is not cancer causing.
Yeah. But so what is when a person gets a cancer diagnosis and they go on Well, obviously, like the first thing that is generally done is like there's a radical change of diet, right? And then some people will go on a spiritual quest, so to speak, in part and parcel with the fast. And you know, I have friends who have developed an amazing spiritual practices in their healing journey, as well as diet. And you know, when you talk to them, you know, they'll usually mention that they change their diet, but they'll usually make responsible for their healing their idea that they have healed themselves into a new body, you know. And but that also would not, you know, it wouldn't kind of run into a problem with this, because if that is your path and that is your journey, and you do begin to heal those traumas, those old traumas, then it would make sense that the body finds a way to. And I know people who have, you know, were diagnosed with 8 weeks to live, and they didn't look like they were going to make it when I met them, and they begin this journey, this profound healing journey. And you know, I don't even know about some of their diets, but I do know that they found a powerful spiritual practice and dedicated themselves to it. And 2-3 years later, you know, I'm still talking to them, and they look great, and they're helping other people find a healing path themselves. So, like, I guess, you know, there is a path of healing, and I don't want to give like alternative healing any bad slack, but I think I don't think that it interferes with this with German New Medicine that you're talking about, right? Wouldn't it make sense then, if that's yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't interfere at all. It's just, it's understanding more of the nuance. So typically a person, by the time they find out they have cancer, their body is already healing. You know what I mean? So there's that, you know, your body was already in the healing process. The cancer is not something going wrong. It's something the body did intentionally. By the time you find it, often you've already resolved the conflict. And now you're kind of, you know, your mindset during that period of time when your body is in this tissue repair mode matters. And so the spiritual journey is important. You know, the nutritional stuff, it is important. You know, it's still important to eat clean food, to not eat, you know, processed factory garbage food, because that's just more pressure on your system. And so as a person changes their diet, the only thing that changes isn't what's going in, it's the self-value. And so like when you were like, oh, you know, I'm getting my act together, I'm going to start eating right, like that's a sign of like self-love and self-worth. And so there's deep kind of psychological things happening when somebody changes their diet. But by that token too, a person could, you know, get a cancer diagnosis and say, oh, what did the people do that healed from this cancer? And you try to mimic their doing.
Yeah.
You mimic their doing, you try to do their diet. You're just like so perfect on this raw vegan juice, whatever thing, but it doesn't work for you. Or you find that it's not giving you the result, or you develop even more cancers, because something that can happen that's not uncommon is that a person has a cancer diagnosis and then they're like, oh my gosh, I really have to change my diet. And then they like do something radically different, cutting out foods and, you know, things. And then they could potentially experience a starvation conflict, which affects the liver, can cause liver cancer. And so then they say, oh, the cancer has moved from the cervix to the liver, or from the breast to the, and that has never been proven. The theory of metastasis is just an idea in the minds of the doctors, but Dr. Hammer discovered that's not how it works, is that a person has multiple conflicts. If there's multiple points of cancer, because, you know, and it really doesn't make sense if you actually look at, you know, how is this proposed to travel? We've never seen a cancer cell in transit from, you know, point A initiating spot to point B. That's never been found. And so it's just an idea. But when you understand, there's like a cascade of things that happen. Once you get that diagnosis, boom, self-devaluation, death-right conflict, starvation.
Nocebo. If you know, I mean, I'm a big believer in the placebo, and of course the nocebo, because it's belief is so powerful. You know, I've heard stories. I'm sure you've heard many stories as well, but I know one story, and I God, I gotta find it. I'm gonna find the article. But this guy was given he was about 63, 64 years old. He was misdiagnosed with terminal cancer, and he had 1 year to live. And he said to himself, and he promised that he just wanted to make it to his new grandson's first birthday. And so this guy, you know, all year they were treating the cancer, and he was struggling, and sure enough, he died one the day after Christmas, and then they found out that he was a misdiagnosis from the word go. It was a tragic thing, but you could argue that it was the treatment that killed him. I mean, certainly it had something to do with it, but he had made his amends, so to speak. He had made, he had decided what he wanted to accomplish with the last year of his life, and look what he did. He accomplished it, but it's the nocebo, the death curse, the voodoo death curse, we call it. It's the power of belief is tremendous.
Oh, it so absolutely is. It's that expectation. And that's the thing is, diagnoses are often curses. They're spells cast upon people. And then what do people look at? Oh, they look up expectation of how long can I survive this? How long have we look at other people's stories. And so when someone, and this is so interesting to keep in mind when you're in a medical situation and the doctors are saying, oh, well, it doesn't look good. We've never seen anybody, beat this. It's like, well, you've never seen anybody beat this because you tell people nobody beats this.
Yeah.
You just planted that seed in the mind of the person. And just given the way that the model is, we believe the man in the white coat. We believe the doctor with the clipboard. You subjugate yourself to him when you even go in. And so you do believe, and this is, when people, and often people that I work with, they're kind of in both worlds. They're still going into their doctor, and it's like, I just want you to observe. I want you to observe how this relationship feels when you're there. How do you feel about the words that they say, or the or the raised eyebrow, or like the facial expressions, or when you say something and they respond? How do you feel? How does that make you feel when you're there? Because so many people are unaware of the influence that the medical doctor has over them, and how powerful, how their words mean more.
Oh my God,
than something else. And so that is a very powerful thing to pay attention to. What am I believing? What are my expectations? What are the doubts that this person is introducing into me that weren't there before, and the fears that weren't there before, but now are kind of awakened because of these words? When you start watching that transaction, you're like, I don't know if I want to come here very often anymore.
Yeah. God, it's, we put doctors on such a pedestal. It's crazy, I mean, and when you learn about the model that they're learning from, when you learn the truth about the model that they're learning from, and you can talk to a few doctors who have learned this truth. Most of them have walked away from mainstream medicine, most of them by choice, and the rest because you really can't continue to keep your Hippocratic oath when you begin to learn some of the truth about what it means to be a doctor in Western society today. And look, that's not their fault. They didn't go into medicine thinking that this was going to be it. But just like any other school of thought, it is a school, and it is, there is a discipline and a subservience of will that goes into you're going to do what you're taught, or literally we're going to take your license away. There's so much pressure under doctors, and that's why you've seen it come to a great big head with what's going on, with doctors really afraid to say anything, and then you put them in a situation where they think the bubonic plague is happening, and by God, people are gonna suffer, people are gonna die needlessly. We saw that a lot. I saw that a lot happen where I live. But yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy that look, if you have an appendicitis, you have to go to the emergency room. They can do great things. It's amazing what they can do. I'm not taking anything away from what they're capable of, the surgeries they're capable of. But the system that's in place is obviously flawed. What world are you living in? It's obviously flawed. It's not a health system. That's for sure. It's, it's a stretch to call it a treatment system, but I guess you could. But, I think the sick care system is the best way to describe it, because that's what it does. And that's why I was so attracted to you and what you were saying and what you were teaching, and fascinated with the German New Medicine and how it relates to what I've come to understand about the body and about healing. So, The cervical cancer one, is can you give another example that was consistent, as far as something that happened and then what showed up later,
Yes, and this is, the thing I love about this that is so different from the allopathic model is, it's like allopathy, it's like religion, that there are the holy ones who went and studied and they learned the complex language and all of the things. So you have to convene with them in order to get your remedy. You have to convene with the priest or the doctor in order to, convene with the Almighty. This cuts out the middleman entirely, because when you understand your body, and when every human individual knows this map, knows GNM, they're like, oh, of course, I know where this rash came from. I know why this bleeding is happening. I know, where this mucus in my stool is coming from. It's like these things aren't scary to you anymore, which means you don't need someone to tell you like a scary diagnosis. So another example, so in the colon, and so a person who experiences something, an example that I know of is a woman who experienced a shocking revelation about something going on with her husband. And it was just like shocking and was hard to digest. It was hard to accept. It was hard to break down that this was going on and she had no idea. And so the body, how does the body experience? Like, I can't digest this. That's the psyche sensation. Undigestible, can't accept, can't break down, can't process. The body activates the biological program associated with the digestive tract, with the colon. And so that impacts the brain stem. It's the oldest type of tissue and the oldest part of the brain. And so what happens is there's proliferation. There is additional cells that are built to help you to better either absorb or to produce juices to break down this indigestible morsel that's going on. And it's going to, and so there's proliferation, there's additional cells. And so this is another really cool thing that Dr. Hammer discovered, is that our body is built out of different tissue layers. So when you're just an embryo, there are these 3 tissue layers that differentiate into 4 different tissue layers. And all of our parts and pieces are built out of different types of tissue, so like the tissue of your digestive tract is different than the tissue of your external skin. We've got ectoderm and then we've got endoderm. And so Dr. Hammer discovered that all of these different tissue changes that we can develop in the body, they have a specific way of operating. And so the cervix, there was tissue loss. With the colon, there's tissue addition. So we get more cells during the active conflict. And the purpose there was to widen the space. Here it's to help to digest. And so that, this proliferation of this additional tissue cell is going to continue as long as this person is in the active conflict. And then when the conflict resolves, the person, either they finally come to terms with it, they make some kind of change in their life, they go through some type of forgiveness or release, some transmutation of their experience, some psychic alchemy, they do something and they resolve the conflict. Then the body starts to decompose the cells that were built up. So the body has built within it microsurgeons to remove these extra tissue cells that are no longer necessary. And what do they use? They use ancient bacteria. So the bacteria and fungus in our bodies, they are our helpers. They are our workers. They are there specifically for the purpose of decomposing cells that are no longer necessary because the biological program is over. They operate off of signals from the brain. And so that's how we have bacteria in our bodies all of the time. Swab your throat, you could have tuberculosis and streptococcus, and you have all these different bacteria, but they're not doing anything. That must be baffling for the germ theory believers, because it's like, those bacteria are there all the time, but they're not infecting you. It's only when they become necessary, when you've resolved a conflict and the body starts to decompose those cells. I was just talking with people yesterday about the tonsils. The tonsils have to do with insalivating a morsel. So we want more saliva to break down to either the right side has to do with breaking down, getting in the morsel, or spitting out the morsel has to do with the left tonsil. And so the tonsils will proliferate, they'll get big, they'll get really swollen up because they are proliferating in response to this. I can't swallow, I can't break down this morsel. And then when you resolve it, then you get those white patches all over your tonsils. And the doctor says, oh my goodness, these are infected tonsils. We need to remove them. And it's like, well, that's, a bit extreme, because why is this even happening? Isn't this happening for a reason? Is it just the bacteria are in this kid's throat and they just keep taking over? No, there is a specific process. There is cellular proliferation, resolution, and then the bacteria become active during that phase of cellular breakdown. And so this completely changes everything about the germ theory. Everything we thought about germs and bugs and bacteria being causative agents, we think it causes, the infection in the tonsils, but that's not the case. It's an effect. It shows up as the cleanup crew.
So basically, when you get strep throat, when you get conjunctivitis, that's probably the reason why they're like, well, conjunctivitis, it's either the virus or the bacteria. We don't know which one you have. Let's test. It's like, wait a minute. How do you not? How can it be? You start to realize like the flaws in the different theories and why something can go from a infection to a viral infection, and how you're like, wait a minute. I thought they were different things, but I digress. Anyway, what I was going to say, damn it, what was I going to say? I was going to say something. Probably, oh, man, I should have never went off about that. I'm going to let you keep going, and hopefully it'll come to me. Oh, I was saying, so when you get conjunctivitis, really, it's not that you've been exposed. What's happening is basically the cleanup services have come into town, and there's a detoxification going on. I mean, or whatever the process is, whether it's pink eye or how do you explain some of the more chronic, or how does German new medicine approach and explain some of the more chronic things that we see happening, especially with our younger people today, like with allergies and with some of these autoimmune diseases that kids are being born with more and more frequently. Like, what's the understanding there?
Yeah. So the whole idea of autoimmune disease is inaccurate. And I think it's such a disservice to the body, because it makes a person think that their body is attacking itself, that your body, oh, something's screwed up or something's damaged, and now your body is just attacking you. And that's not what's taking place. When someone has a chronic issue, there is a chronic conflict that is being reactivated. And so a common chronic, so allergies, for example, if you develop an allergy, it is not the food that is the problem inherently, because often people will be eating that food normally for years, and then all of a sudden, oh, I can't eat gluten. Oh, I can't eat dairy. Oh, it could happen early in childhood, or it could happen later in life, where a person all of a sudden becomes intolerant to a bunch of different foods. And it's not the food. It is that the person had that food in their system when they experienced a conflict shock. And so if you had dairy in your system and experienced an indigestible morsel conflict, you're, eating macaroni and cheese and your parents are fighting and throwing dishes at each other. It's like, I can't accept
Throwing
that.
dishes at you.
Yeah, I can't digest this. It's like, oh, every time there's dairy in your system, your body remembers this indigestible situation and you have diarrhea. And so that is how those things get linked up biologically. And so every time you're exposed to the substance again, whether it's an odor or a food, or even a situation, or a song could be playing, you could be driving by somewhere and your body's like, oop, we remember. The body remembers the moment of shock, and then it preemptively goes back through the conflict, and you have a flare up. You have, some inflammation, you start sneezing, or, sinus something, or
What
cough.
about anaphylactic shock?
And so with that situation, like I can't swallow, and there's a swelling up within the throat, and then often there's a retaining of water, and so everything just kind of balloons, and the throat swells right up because I can't swallow. This was the main conflict that occurred when you were exposed to the thing the first time. And so you have to go back. We have to look at what is it that happened, what was shocking to you. And there have been people that have been able to detach the conflict. I used to get a swollen throat every time I ate pistachios. And I eat pistachios, and then the next morning I wake up and my throat, like you could just see, it was like swollen up. And I remembered back when I was a kid. I remember being so hungry, and my parents, I think my mom was coming to pick us up, and we were waiting for her. And me and my brothers, we ate like this whole entire bag of pistachios until I got sick from them. And I
Hmm.
was like, oh, I can't even have another one. And so every time I had pistachios after that, I would get this like I can't swallow, and I'd have swelling in my throat. But once I learned GNM and I kind of consciously disconnected it. I became aware of it. I noticed what I was going through at the time, and I saw how it was kind of repeating every time I ate this food. And now I have pistachios very frequently and have no issues at all whatsoever.
Hmm.
And so it's like, this is something that you can heal. Some people, some situations, you may just go ahead and avoid the thing for forever if you don't want to go through the process of working and digging and try to figure out what it was that triggered and initiated the whole process. But it is possible, which is super cool.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine it becomes complex when there's more than one underlying issue. And, when you're dealing with something like these days, like, God, I don't even know how this has come to be. This world we live in is so foreign to me because I live on peanut butter. I love it so much. But, like, these kids have peanut allergies, and my God, if there's a fucking peanut like in the air, like these kids are like so sensitive to it, and they have such a reaction. And it's scary. It's scary for the parents when they're watching their kids and their kids can't breathe. But what about these kids who are, really young, and so they start to have this reaction when they're 3, 4 years old? How their little minds are so, I mean, they're developed, but they're not very complex to be forming these, some of these more traumas that sound like could be like, like how could they understand it to take that traumatic snapshot in their little minds? I mean, I know that of course there's exceptions, and like if you're talking about starvation and talking about neglect, these are deep seated traumas that can be very damaging on a multitude of levels for a child who's 0 to 7. But you know, it makes me wonder how you attribute some of those, and is it possible that some of that is brought in from the parents? Like we talk a lot about ancestral healing, and how, like you were saying, so you can really, they're starting to be able to look at the DNA strand, in a laboratory and start to mark and see what trauma looks like, and they're starting to be able to kind of trace it from generation to generation, and which is really mind blowing. But it just goes to, it speaks to the merit of ancestral healing. And so I'm wondering, like, are some of these cases, have you ever thought about, could it be that they're getting it from the parents, the great grandparents, or even farther back than that?
So a couple of things, like with children and with conflicts, it's very biological in nature. It's not psychological. It doesn't have to do with like the conscious mind. It has to do very much with like the reflexive kind of animal brain. That's the thing that takes the snapshot. That's the thing that links up. It's our biology. And so that's why, as far as like when you're resolving a conflict, you don't want to start with like just changing the mind. You want to change the body. You want to have a very practical, like if you were an animal, how would you resolve this? Like thinking from a very biological standpoint is going to be the first approach for trying to resolve something. But then if a biological kind of practical resolution either isn't possible, let's say you lost someone and that person is gone, and you have to, you replacing them, like you can't replace your mother necessarily. Can you get another mother figure? Well, yes. But it's like, then you have to shift your perceptions leading to the way that you're seeing and experiencing something. So with children are incredible. And 0 to 7, they really are, they're very much dependent on their caregivers to know how they should feel about the world. And so if there's a little child who's experiencing something, I've been speaking with a lot of mothers lately who have children who are exclusively breastfed, never, but they're experiencing things like rashes, and a rash is a separation conflict. And so, if the child has never been separated from you, and they're breastfed, and they're all the things, everything's taken care of, what's then going on with the mother? What separation conflicts are you dealing with? And inevitably there's going to be something that the mother has been dealing with, a life situation, and that the child is mirroring, is experiencing. And so the child is having their own experience of the conflict. And so the thing about like ancestral type of trauma and things like that, Dr. Hammer, his perspective, as far as I'm aware, is that, from like something that can just come with you, like an ancestral trauma that you have no control over. He says that you had to have the conflict yourself. You had to experience it for yourself in order for you to have the impact in your brain and for your body to go through adaptive physiology. Something had to have happened, whether that was, came through your parents and they kind of traumatized you in the same way that they were traumatized,
I
and that
see. Yeah.
trauma carries on. And I resonate a lot with that perspective, because the idea that I could have something ancestral, like some type of problem or issue or disease manifesting from, generations prior that I had nothing to do with, that to me feels somewhat disempowering, in the sense of like,
Yeah.
I'm an individual. I had to have had the conflict for myself so that I can resolve it. If this conflict began with someone outside of me, yes, I can do something about it, but that feels very much like I'm a victim of my ancestry, rather than I am personally responsible for my perception and experience from the time since I was conceived. And so obviously I didn't have conscious control at
Yeah.
conception in those very early years, but now I get to, heal, reparent, do what I need to do to reimagine my upbringing if I need to resolve a conflict from a time that I don't really even fully consciously remember.
Yeah. I did a podcast with a man, incredible guy named John Newton. If you ever get a chance, you should hear him speak about it. He's a pretty incredible guy. But he talks a lot about ancestral healing, and he's really he's very mainstream. I shouldn't say he's quietly mainstream. So he works in, like, because he works with some high profile clientele. He's often in a hospital. He's often brought in because he's an exceptional guy. I mean, it's crazy because he moved to LA. He was an actor for a while, but then had a remarkable experience that is kind of too crazy to talk about, but it was like a very intense Kundalini awakening that lasted a very long time. And then after that, just spent eons of time, in a spiritual search and journey and practice, and then since put his talent and his calling into helping people. And now he's helping as many people as he can at one time. I think he doesn't do a lot of very privates, except for some of the more higher profile guys. But he talks a lot about how, like, and he's got some amazing theories about it. When he talks about how, and this goes with what I understand. I'm a student of Dr. Joe Dispenza's. I don't know if you've ever heard of Dr. Joe. You've probably seen him on YouTube. If you're on YouTube at all, his face will come up sometimes. I don't know if have you ever heard of Dr. Joe Dispenza?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So if we are, and I think it's absolutely true that we as human beings, we operate in context, to our past in some way, shape, or form. Now many of us are kind of walking echoes and programs and reactions of our past, but many of us have begun to become very conscious of that and those react. And so, in order to create a new, unexpected, and wonderful future, we've begun to deprogram a lot of those past conditionings and programs, because that it allows for an infinite more realities to come in. So, but John's theory was that if the whole human race is co-creating this reality, and the bulk of them are asleep, the bulk of them are like, I don't want to say the Walking Dead, but the bulk of them really have no idea the kind of creative power that they all have, and the power of every intention that they create, and the power of I am. I teach my children, how powerful those two words are, and what follows those two words is a statement that reverberates from here to God, the end of the universe and back. And so when you have billions of people, most of which don't realize that they're creating the future based on the past and the amount of trauma that they have in the past as it is and stands right now. That's the reason why you have this very fucked up thing happening across the world right now, because so many people are creating, this future from this terrible trauma. And he says it's worse than that because what they're realizing is it goes back. And I know this doesn't jive with what you were saying, and I understand it would put people in more of a not a victim, but he's saying that if your great grandfather was in a experienced a potato, it doesn't actually conflict. It's just a broadening of I think the philosophy of German New Medicine. But he's saying if your great relative 400 years ago was in a potato famine and he experienced that kind of trauma, and that snapshot was taken into his DNA, and they're starting to be able to look at that snapshot under the microscope in the DNA, then that may be something that comes up in your life. And I'm like, damn, it's a little scary, but at the same time, it's, if it is true, I mean, it's almost like it goes right with what you're saying. It's just a broader view and perspective of it.
Interesting. Yeah. And I would, even look at the transmission of actual signals from that person who lived through this famine to their offspring. What kind of programming? So is the gene, is the thing we look at in the DNA, is that an effect, or is that just a cause? Is the cause lying in how that man raised his child under this idea of scarcity and you better watch out? And so that's what programming he received from 0 to 7. And so when he had his own kids, he raises them scarcity, you better watch out, and those things are transmitted in that way. And so is the DNA, and that's the thing is when looking at I am, and you look at, the universal principles, as all is mind. Mind is everything. And so DNA is a manifestation of mind. And so mind and consciousness, and what happens in consciousness, and what the potato famine man said I am, that in fact, that was the cause that affected the DNA. What the I am is showing up in the DNA. The DNA is not the causative factor. And so that's one of the things about all of this work that kind of blends in perfectly with my spiritual understanding of consciousness and reality itself, is that it is the consciousness that changes first, and then everything else is an effect. And so that makes perfect sense from the GNM perspective, is like the cancer. And this is the thing, and this is the problem, is when people fear the effect. We fear the BRCA gene. We fear, these genetic imprints of trauma from, thousands of years ago.
I mean, it's got women cutting off their breasts in prevention of a gene.
Yeah.
This has become very popular now, thanks to Angelina Jolie. It's literally insane to me, but that's the level of fear. And it's, the allopathic, I'm sure they're thrilled about it. This is a trend, but it's just, imagine.
Yeah. You fear the external thing, and then you do an external act. You change, you get some gene therapy, you try to eradicate the cancer cell, you try to eradicate the small thing, the external God that you've formed that said, this is the causative agent, this is the problem, this external thing has power over me, so I have to go on a battle, I have to fight, so it's like this very much this external fight mentality. Even the idea of the immune system from the GNM perspective is not accurate, because the whole picture is that we have little guards and fighters that and we fight off the bad bacteria with the good bacteria. That is a warlike model.
We project that model onto everything. It's crazy. It's like religion, the body, everything.
Yeah, it is a normal. So, I love the example one of the GNM teachers gives is like, when the garbage man comes to collect your garbage, are they attacking the garbage? We look at a white
by taking it out. Yeah.
We look at a white blood cell and we say, oh, it's attacking. It's an immune cell and it's attacking this bad thing. It's like, how do you know it's not just taking out the garbage? It's just doing normal maintenance rather than looking at it as, oh, we need to boost these. I mean, the whole idea of like vaccination, we need to do this and create an immune response so the body does this. They have no idea what they are doing. They
Mhm.
have no clue. They say that high antibodies in one case means you have a disease, and in another case they say high antibodies means you're immune from it. They don't
Literally.
have the first idea about what they're doing when it comes to modifying. And that's the arrogance of the allopathic model, is overriding. It says, you don't know how to have a baby. You don't, your baby needs all this stuff injected into it. You don't know how, your body is stupid. It doesn't know what it's doing. We need to take these parts out. And that is just so not in alignment with nature, not in alignment with natural law. That is man-made, arrogant, ego mind who has constructed this model of reality that's extremely profitable and keeps people in fear. And once you see through it, it's just like you see it everywhere and you're like, I want
Yeah.
nothing to do with
It
that.
becomes belligerently obvious once you see through it. It's so hard to get people to see through it, though. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's really nothing you can get somebody to see through. You can kind of get them to peek behind the curtain, but if they're really going to see it, it's going to be a really conscious choice to face it, because it ain't a pretty thing to find out. It's a betrayal of biblical proportions that has been thrust upon this civilization right now, and the science that came from it, this genetically modifying, from whether you're talking about the plants or the people now, the mosquitoes, you know the level of arrogance and limited thinking that goes into these kind of things, it's beyond me. I mean, it blows my fucking mind how anyone could think it's a good idea. And at the same time, you know, I'm like, wait a minute, dude, you believe that humans, because I believe that, they're that human beings were put, but this was done by, a race of beings that is beyond the physical. So like, the interference that happened, not interference, but the design that went into the human technology was, there was a modification that went on. That's what I believe. I mean, I don't believe it religiously, but I think that there's a lot of scientific evidence that shows that there was a pretty blatant fusion that happened into our DNA about 250,000 years ago. I mean, like, it's pretty obvious when you look at it. It almost looks like, if you have you know a tulip, and you took the stem of the tulip and you kind of cut out about 5 inches of it, and then put the stem of a rose in it and perfectly sewed it back together. You can look at it, the DNA, and it's really literally just like that. You can see where there was this fusion, this perfect fusion that happened about 250,000 years ago to our DNA. And in fact, scientists discovered this, I think it was back in 96. I think it was at Yale. And of course, like, with scientists, they don't want to take credit when they're like, oh, fuck, how are we going to even tell anyone about this? So, we conclude, that there was an ancient fusion that happened, all these years ago. No one wanted to take credit for it, and they didn't want to say really what they thought it was. But you can find this study that was done, and the results came. I'm going to put a link to it so people can see it, because it's just the science is there to support that. But then again, the way I think about that is like, that was not exactly what's happening and what we're doing. That level of genetic modification is not, I don't even know how it's comparable. But I just question myself, because I'm like, dude, how do you believe that happened to create us, and then but modifying corn isn't okay? I don't know. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about, Melissa.
Yeah, I'm not all up on that gene stuff. I guess, the thing that with this work that I find just most relevant is a person zooming into their own personal experience. And that's the thing about GNM and the 5 biological laws, is that you are capable of understanding it for yourself. This everything else, like the theoretical and the what if this, and I don't know about that. But what I do know is that if I experience a can't swallow conflict, that my body adapts to it. And then when I resolve it, I get a sore throat. And that by understanding that the sore throat isn't something going wrong, that it's my body doing exactly what it's supposed to do, that frees me from fear. And it makes me know that I don't have to go to anybody outside of me in order to be okay. And so that's kind of the main messaging that, why do I teach this and why am I so passionate about like sharing this with people, is because I believe that you having this physical human form, however it got to be the way that it is now, Dr. Hammer discovered it operates in a certain way. And that when you can, and one of the other GNM teachers, they say, learn it now, learn GNM while you're still healthy, because of the whole thing we were talking about earlier with the conflict of a diagnosis. Because a person who discovers a lump, but they know GNM, is completely different from a person discovering a lump and not knowing GNM. It's night and day. And so it's to free you from fear and I encourage anyone listening to this to learn how your body works so that you are not shocked if something happens. Because when you are overtaken with that fear, there's just this cascade of more and more and more conflicts. And that's the reason. And so a lot of people will kind of ask about GNM. It's like, oh, well, it can't cure this. And it's not about curing anything. GNM is just about understanding. It's about understanding your psyche brain organ, this apparatus, the stuff that you came with. You need to know how it functions so that you can best operate within the laws that govern our biology. So no, knowing GNM doesn't necessarily mean that every cancer can be cured, but it definitely can be caught sooner, resolved more quickly so that it doesn't become something like the colon cancer example. There are situations where tumors have grown so large that medical intervention and having the tumor removed surgically would be the very best option, because you may not survive through the tissue healing process. There are conflicts that affect the heart. Like if you've had a heart related conflict for longer than 6 to 9 months and you've had angina, that Dr. Hammer discovered that could lead to, when resolved, a heart attack that kills you. And so you want to pay attention. And if you know these things, you can work within the laws. And so working within these laws, noticing more quickly when you're conflicted. And the core of the work that I teach people is in awareness, is in noticing when you're conflicted, because so many people were just awash and stress and worry and fear and all of this stuff. We have no organization within our consciousness to notice, oh yeah, you know what? I have been really frustrated or really wanting to separate from my partner, but I've just shoved it down because it's just one of a million things that are unaddressed in my psyche. And so it's in noticing more rapidly, ooh, I'm conflicted, I'm not sleeping, my hands are cold. What do I need to resolve? How quickly can I get back to homeostasis so my body doesn't have to go through a large adaptation process that will lead to, potentially some type of intense physical symptoms.
Yeah, or potentially a diagnosis that seems like a nightmare, right? It's I love that message about GNM and that you bring to people, because it's a message that I'm unfortunately found it's been consistent with me for a few years, but of course it really got louder the moment everything went down with the with the mess that's going on right now. Because it's funny because at the moment I just flew back from Hawaii. I was in March of 2020, and already the fear was getting, coming to a very high level all over. And I was like, I don't know, I took like 7 flights and was all over. And I'm just like, what is everyone panicked about? Like why are we all freaking out again? I just flew around the world and back. I don't think there's anything to worry about. Like I didn't see anyone falling over. I didn't really know a lot about what was happening then, but my message was like, I don't understand what is the fear? What are you guys watching? It's like everyone was watching a horror movie, and they were watching the news, which is crazy to me. But fear is a big thing. I talk about it a lot. I love what Dr. Zach Bush says about death, and about this misunderstanding that we have about it, and how it's not, there's no such thing as death. It's really just it's all a transformation. It's all a transition from one to the next. And so I'm definitely going to talk to you more, and I'm going to bring you further out than probably you do go on some of your other interviews with some of my last questions for you. Because I think we have a good idea of G&M, and I think that whoever it's going to resonate with, they're definitely going to look into it based on what they heard. I mean, I absolutely looked into it the moment I heard you talking about it, and it's fascinating, and it really it aligns with a lot of what I've come to understand. I obviously have a few questions, but those are kind of more interstellar questions than they are, based in some of our understandings here. But let me ask you, what, and not so much in a G&M philosophy, but, Melissa, what do you feel about, like, how do you see death and this life that we have? Do you believe in reincarnation?
It's all a game. It's all a game. One of my early influences when I started opening up to things of the mind was Alan Watts, and just his description of, like the Hindu idea of life and death, and that we're all just God playing different roles,
Mm-hmm.
and God wanted to play Faust and God wanted to play me. And, and that description of, if you could have everything, you would just say, oh, I want this life. I want this life. And then eventually you'd want to fall asleep and you'd want to have a complete surprise life.
Mm-hmm.
So what death is the same thing as before you were born. Whatever that was, that's what
Right.
it is. And you weren't afraid before you came into this world. Why would you be afraid of going out of it? When you see this as just kind of this endless play, this endless expanse of experience. It's
Mm-hmm.
like you wake up and you have a new experience, and maybe you wake up in a different world, in a different realm where different things exist. It's all part of the game. Everything that's in the human imagination, the human imagination is God. It is everything that you you create within your mind. All is mind. All of this is materialization of imagination. And so imagination solidifies into form. And so we
Mm-hmm.
have this capability of imagining endless. I mean, that's the thing, is your imagination is limitless, but so few people realize the power of a thought. And if there's one thing that I teach the people that I'm working with, is like, pay attention to how powerful your thoughts are. You think nothing of it. It's like you're a fish in water. They're just endless. They just come. There's just so many thoughts. You don't even think anything of it. But when you start to experience each thought as a potent creative act, ooh, it's like, ooh, that changes things.
It does change things, and I tell at first it can be a bit shocking, I think, and scary for people to kind of begin to reacclimate, and take control of their thoughts. Because, God, I love this, man. When I met Dr. Joe, the first thing he said to the people sitting in front of him was, if you do you believe that every thought that you have and every feeling that you have has a direct effect in what shows up in your life, in the reality that you're creating? And almost everyone in the audience I was with raised their hand. I mean, that's why we were there, most of us, right? And he said, well, if that's true, then how can you let one thought come through that is not conscious? And he said, if it has a direct effect on what's showing up, then how conscious are you of every thought that's coming through? And why aren't, there shouldn't be a single thought that comes through that is not what you have tailored it. And I'm like, damn, that's a lot of responsibility. That's going to take some rearranging on my end. But, it's been the most amazing journey of my life.
It's funny. A lot of people, and this is something that is relevant, comes up in GNM a lot, is sometimes they'll hear about GNM and they'll use it as a reason to freak themselves out. It's like, oh my gosh, my reactions and my conflicts, oh, that's causing. So they start to worry about their worry. They start to stress about their stress. They start to fear about their fear. And it's like, you have to realize that reaction of fear is not serving you. So you have to learn that even those reactions, the fact that you're reacting that way isn't because, oh, GNM has freaked me out. You're experiencing it like that but that's simply because of the way your mind is currently operating. And you
Mm.
have to, and that's the thing about taking the mind off of autopilot and starting to notice, how am I perceiving? How am I, running this through that same program that's creating more fear? You have to get off of the merry-go-round in order to see, oh, I'm really good at creating fear responses to anything. And so I hear this good news that, oh, it's my consciousness and how I'm perceiving and experiencing shocks in my life and how my biology is, working to adapt. It's like, oh, that's all good news, but
Yeah,
I'm able to take it and turn it into bad news because of my fear factory in my
that's
mind.
right. And that's a direct response and pre-programmed, thing I mean, if you look at, all you have to do is really become conscious for one day out of your life, and especially if you live in a, if your lifestyle is still bringing in a lot of situations that are getting your BPM up, and you're looking at your watch and you're like, holy shit, all I did was talk to that guy, and so we're going at 122 BPM, like holy shit. There's a lot of people who have lifestyles like that now. But if you look at the responses that are happening in each and every instance, the response is not, the ouch does not on par with the pinch. You know what I'm saying? The response, I mean, like your adrenaline's going like you're about to take off and run for gold in the Olympics. And meanwhile, all you did was talk about this new project with this guy who you don't like. Maybe you want to look at the subconscious response that you're having, because clearly something is being triggered in you, and it doesn't have anything to do with this conversation. And that's a great, I think, metaphor and analogy of what we see happening on a grand scale and in the microcosm, as above, so below. My God, you were speaking so often, and so often I was thinking as above, so below with what you were saying, and how some of the things that happen to us, we think, but then they show up because of this fractal universe that we live in.
Absolutely. As above, so below. The laws are consistent and they show up absolutely everywhere. And they are always the same. And that's how you know that it's a law. It is this consistency and this rhythm. Something really cool that we didn't get into much about the biological laws, but the second biological law, it's this law of two phases. And it just shows it's with perfection that these programs go through, the conflict phase, and your body is in heightened sympathetic activity. And then there's parasympathetic, and that's the rhythm. That's this, the rhythm in correspondence. All of the laws, all of the universal laws can be seen within these biological laws, because they're just this consistent sense of this is how it always works. There are not exceptions to the way that the
Yeah.
body works. If this cancer is here, this conflict occurred every single time. And so when you can start to rely upon that, then you work within that model, and then answers are shown to you. And that's what's so cool, is being in tune with nature and your body and with the infinite, because we have access to infinite intelligence
Mm-hmm.
at all times. Dr. Hammer, he kind of downloaded, he had access to infinite intelligence, and he was ready. He was a receptive vessel for this realization, but the information has always been there. And that's what's so cool, is just linking up with all that is just knowing that, there's not someone out there that has sacred knowledge. That it's like everything comes to you in the perfect time.
Yeah.
And when you just trust that and get into the flow, you get to this state. And this is where, how do you live knowing GNS? It's like you want to be, conflict free. And how do you get conflict free? Is you live in this state of perpetual faith and confidence and trust.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't believe in loss or death or separation anymore, because that can be, if you believe that death is once and final and tragic and horrible and scary, well, of course you're going to do
Yeah.
whatever it takes to.
If you think this is your one go at this and you got to get it right, my God, how much pressure is that?
So much pressure. And that's
Fucking
why people
crazy.
experience like such intense
And they
physiological.
do fucked up things. I mean, they do some I mean, like, to try to scratch and get ahead and carve out some kind of, cushion, which is more about survival than anything, and not having to ever worry again. The kind of things that people do under that kind of pressure, and it's a misunderstanding, because if they, I think that if I have to believe that if they really knew what they were, they couldn't do that. They have no reason to do that. I was just having this conversation with an incredible woman on a podcast that it's not out yet, but I was telling her, like, it's my opinion that there are many, eons and eons of planets and people, beings that exist. I forgot to shut my phone off. That's what I get. Sorry about that. You think I'm running some kind of office here. Hold on one moment. Okay, we got it. A highly enlightened society, a highly enlightened like beings of people who live, if they understand what they are, there would be no need for, first of all, you wouldn't need laws like, hey, you're not allowed to kill anyone, and if you do, we're going to lock you up, and don't steal anything. And you wouldn't have, people going hungry, because people would know that what they're seeing is a reflection of them, and in fact is them in a great many ways, more than they could imagine. But so why would you wouldn't have to mug anyone for their wallet, because if they saw you hungry, they would give you food. It's a different way of understanding the world. And I think as soon as we start teaching our young ones more about that and less about monopoly and fake history and stuff like that, I think we're going to evolve a lot quicker.
Totally. But in some ways, it's like a lighthearted way of looking at it, is it's really like we're ruining the game. When you think of like if we're all in a play and we're all like, hey, we're all actors. We're not really, none of this is really what you think it is. It's like people, they get offended. They're like, no, and they go back to their, their British accents, and they're playing because they're playing in these roles and they don't want to be woken up. And that's, in so many senses, we're ruining the game for them when we try to forcibly wake someone up who's not ready to wake up. They want to play this role. They want to be small and scared and have all of these laws and be, terrified at night and
codependent,
Yeah. And it's like, you've got to understand that, like, if God really is playing all of these roles, he wants to play that role of being small. And so when it comes to the, these so-called enlightened who, realize this is the game and the whatever, a lot of people, and I was speaking with someone the other day who just kind of felt pressured, was like, oh, I need to be speaking more clearly and articulately so I can wake people up. It's like, that's not your job. Like, waking people up, if you want to raise a child, and that's the interesting thing, even about raising children. Oh, if we just raise children in a specific way, how many people have tried to raise a child in a specific way only for that child to grow up, turn 18 and turn coat and do all of the things that you wish that they would never do? Classic rebellious scripting. And it's, and so that's where the detached, just kind of like the Tao of just watching, like, what is what is, and let's observe it and play and enjoy your own life and do the things that make the most sense to you. But I feel like, sometimes our efforts to, wake the crowd and help,
they're really, it's fruitless, frustrating efforts most of the time. They don't really ever work out. I mean, so believe me, I know, I'm sure as well. I mean, you could talk to people all day when if they don't have a mind to hear, then it doesn't matter how well their ears are working. It's just not. You could literally have a blackboard of information for them, all peer reviewed, and then it doesn't matter. You know what I mean? It really doesn't matter if they're not ready to hear it or see it. They're not going to believe it. Doesn't matter how much you argue. I just need to remind myself of that daily so I don't waste any more time trying.
Yeah, definitely something. And that's the thing, is like you sing for the sake of singing. Like, do your thing for the sake of doing your thing. Like, if your thing, like I do want to share this with people, but it's not to change. Like, I was very much a right fighter in my early years of my career. I was like, this is the way. You need to stop eating this food. You need to get these toxins out of your system. You need to do these things and sleep and eat and go outside. And you have to do it because you have to be healthy. And if you're not healthy, you're going to die. And your family, it's like, it was very intense. And it was very much like, this is the right way. And I have, And I would do it at the expense of relationships. I'd go to my parents' house and throw all their food in the garbage and tell them that they're killing themselves. And, like that was my gig for a while. I was that crazy
Yeah.
lady. And now it's kind of the zoomed out version of like, I still want to teach. I still have this impulse to share and to speak and to teach stuff to people, but it's more like I like to do it, so I'm going to do it. But it's
Yeah.
not that like I gotta save the people, because ultimately that does lead to more frustration, or they're not getting it, or disappointment.
Yeah.
And now it's just fun.
And in fact, you're probably a lot healthier, of course, in this state than you were when you were kind of efforting in 3D and trying to, whip your parents into some kind of a health conscious state. I know with my parents, it's like I'm wasting my time. I mean, like, all you can try and plant seeds, but it's, they think they know best. Of course, they're older than you and they made you. So it's like and once I have 2 kids. I have 2 boys, and I'm always going to see them as my sons, and that's because they always will be. And I think about my dad and what that means to him. Of course, that means something different to him because he's a different person than I am. So I just got to remind myself that I'm always going to be like, that to him. And there's only so much that I'm going to say to him that he's going to think that I have discovered that he somehow missed. I'm not rewriting the laws of physics for him, that's for sure. But so speaking of the laws of physics, Melissa, I don't know where you live, but I'm sure there's more UFO activity there than there is here in New York City, since UFOs were really smart enough to stay away from the city most of the time. Tell me about it.
That world is not something I have gotten that much into of the UFO. I've not gone that far out, honestly, and I've never had any personal experiences. And so,
That's okay. You
yeah,
probably
I'm
will
very,
now.
yeah, right. I've heard things, but yeah, from my own personal experience, it's stories and ideas. And, I obviously do not put limits on what's possible in
Hmm.
the realms of existence that I don't know about. But yeah, I'm in Big Bear, California. And so I'm
Oh,
sure there's
nice.
stuff
Yeah.
going on, but I don't know about it.
Yeah, who knows? Big Bear, it could be our ships just masquerading as UFOs anyway, but that's another conversation. But there's a beautiful, and I shouldn't say UFOs because, well, first of all, very few of them are actually unidentified. Most of them are identified anyway. But when I say UFOs, I just mean there's this wonderful cohesion that I've found in many metaphysical and spiritual teachings that go, and come from people who have connected with, what is often called a higher self. And it's that, but that's just another way of saying, the part of their soul that is also living another life in another system or dimension, and many of those, most of those beings or, collectives, are far more evolved, in their place or time. Some of them aren't even in a place or time. Some of them are outside of 3D reality. In 3-dimensional reality, if I'm going to go to my kitchen, I have to walk there. These beings have evolved past that. They can come down to this when they decide to. Like if they want to visit our planet, they have to. Which is why when we find them, in their little spacecraft, and we find them and they're literally like, well, I don't know if you probably never heard the reports, but they're usually like their suits are part of them, but like they have no idea how they got the suits on, and that's because they manifested the suits when they manifested the bodies to come down in the spacecraft to visit specifically for, probably to check on the humans that are blowing shit up and doing stupid stuff on the moon, stuff like that. But it's just fascinating to me. So I always like to ask about it. There's some wonderful metaphysical teachings that have come from people who, quietly are claiming to be channeling extraterrestrial beings, you know.
Well, one of my favorite books is Stranger in a Strange Land. And so,
Stranger in a Strange Land.
yeah. Have you read it? Oh,
No,
it's
no, but I'm going to look into it now.
Oh, I highly anybody listening to this, read that book. It's so good. It's really, really excellent. I'm on my second Robert Heinlein book, because he's a very interesting author. But that book it's so good. And the guy in the book, the character, he was kind of raised on an alien planet and brought back a lot of wisdom. And his character is just fascinating. So,
Ooh,
Stranger in a Strange Land.
sounds great to me. I'm going to check it out. Um, Sounds really good, actually. Yeah, I'm certainly going to check it out. So let me ask you. I love this question, and I'm so curious about what you're going to say. What if you were going to, if you were moving on to the next, whatever it is, you know, the next life, the next, the next transformation, transition, whatever you want to call it, but you had the capacity to, you know, whisper something into the ear of humanity, something that they would, like it would be a seed that was planted. Maybe it's a mantra, but it's something that you would hope that you left them that they could understand, and the understanding of which would really help the species to live an easier, healthier, happier life and existence. Would you say to them? What would you say to them?
Trust your body. Your body knows how to heal. Your mind creates everything. That's what I would say.
It's perfect. It's short and sweet and perfect. Yeah. Yeah, trust the body, trust the mind.
Trust the
You
body, trust the mind.
don't give your power away. Yeah.
Absolutely. And that, yeah, that's when people really realize, and that's the game, is feeling powerless, because you have to feel like there's restrictions. You have to feel like there's something to fight against. And that's it's contrast. It's how why does bondage feel so bad? Bondage and freedom, they're two sides of the same. You have to, it's that we live in this world of polarity. That's how the physical universe manifests. We have to have space and not space. We have to have contrast and opposites. And so, when you can start to see that all of the contrast that you're experiencing, it must be that way. Like the depths of depravity, like the most horrible things that you can ever imagine in this human world, they have to exist because the height of just like precious, lovely wonderfulness exists. And so it's that.
Were you eavesdropping on my last podcast, Melissa? I mean, I swear to God, you are like quoting me. It's crazy.
That's funny.
I'm gonna splice that footage in
Oh,
because
you
people aren't
should.
gonna believe it. Like you're literally taking the words out of my mouth. I swear I was just saying that. Just saying that. It's amazing that happened.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is that we have to have them both. We have to have it all. And so when you get caught up in trying to, and this is kind of the Alan Watts thing too, the white must win. We set up, we see all this dichotomy, we see good, bad, black, white, on, off, good and evil, and we say, oh, good must win, white must win, the light, this has to win, and if it doesn't, I'm crushed and ruined, and just going to the worst thing ever is going to happen. And you have to see it all. And that's where, because we're above and beyond the duality. It's this non-duality of like just dissolving into nothingness is really the ultimate of this experience. If you want to be totally at peace and at ease, is look at all of it and just have zero judgment. Don't think, no thought. Having no thought is, it's a very interesting thing to do, because you're just here, and you're not thinking about the past, you're not thinking about the future, you're not thinking about value judgments, you're not thinking about the amount of plastic in landfills, you're not thinking about starving children, you're not thinking about it, you're just being, like that pure dropping into pure being is a wonderful exercise. And then when you start to see all of the trappings of the mind kind of come back in as come out of that, you can say, oh, no wonder I get stressed and worried and fearful, is because this limitless being comes and lives in this world of limitation for the experience of living in a world of limitation.
And when you begin to experience the kind of silent bliss and stillness that comes from that practice, then when you go back in and you try to deal with this kind of neuroses habit that, where the mind is just, all this chatter and all these problems, and it becomes unbearable, and you're like, I want to go back. I'm not going to give up that feeling anymore. It's just, it's too great. It's too awesome why would I want to go back to that? And I don't know if you know anything about my background, but I'm an actor and I'm a film producer, and actors tend to be pretty harsh critics of themselves, and most of us come from pretty fucked up families and homes, and that's kind of what draws us to the expression of some of these emotions for in a lot of ways. But I used to have a terrible inner critic. I mean, it was so nasty to myself, and it took me so long to realize where that comes from, and recondition myself to. It's so quiet now, It's quiet, and there's a lot of laughter, and it does. No matter what I do, one thing that I have is to put it in very common terms. The battle, battle terms. It's a notch on my belt that I'm very proud of. That I no longer have that inner critic, telling me what a screw up I am and how bad I fucked that up, and it's I'm very proud of that. One of my greatest accomplishments. Yeah.
That's so good. And that reprogramming and reconditioning of the inner critic is so powerful from the GNM perspective, because musculoskeletal pain comes from, it's a self-devaluation conflict. And so, yeah, if early in life you were criticized and someone said, oh, you're not smart enough, or you need to be better at this, we internalize all of that. And then we have the critic of, that was so stupid. Oh, I look like a fool. Oh, I let everyone down. I'm not enough is kind of the messaging.
Yeah.
And the body hears, I'm not enough. And the body's way of becoming more is by first eroding tissue and then building back stronger. So like after you break a bone, it's stronger. So basically what happens is the bone has these micro erosions, or the muscle or the connective tissue, the lymphatic, the blood vessels. So all of the connective tissues, they erode when you're devaluing. And then when you revalue and you start changing that voice, your body becomes more robust and stronger, so that you become more than enough, because that was, the body has meaningful solutions to these internal problems you're experiencing.
It's a beautiful thing, and you just summed it up and put it really in a poetic and succinct way. Melissa, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm going to include all your information in the description of the video so people can find you, because I have a feeling that people who see this are going to want to hear more about you and talk probably directly to you about some of the things that have happened to them, and I imagine that you're going to be able to help a lot more people in your continued pursuit of this wonderful philosophy and practice that you've discovered, and that you're bringing to people. It's been real, and I got so much. We'll have to do it again sometime soon, because there's just so much to talk about. I wanted to ask you about the recent reunion summit. I think it was called the reunion summit that you were at, that my friend Dr. Edith Umbutu Chan was also at. I don't know if you got a chance to meet her or not.
Oh, she is wonderful.
Isn't she?
Yes, she taught me how to bend spoons. I took one of her classes, and
you did too. I did too. Oh, I love her. Yeah, she's amazing.
Happening again. We're doing it again this in a couple months here.
Oh, I'm gonna jump into it. I'm gonna have to jump into it, because I've been so busy. It's been crazy, but I have my spoons right here, and I practice. I haven't stopped practicing. I've just been crazy busy, but yeah, there's so much we can get into. But I appreciate your time very much.
Oh, it's been so fun. I love these conversations. I love all the interesting places they go. So thank you for having me. And yes, if anyone wants to reach out, I do a free 15-minute info call, so we can chat about whatever you've got going on. We can talk about how it relates to GNM and what you can do to start shifting some of those patterns.
Absolutely. Excellent. Thank you so much, Melissa. I appreciate it, and we'll be in touch. And yeah, you have a great weekend, and we'll certainly reach out to you when this is going to be ready to go out.
Awesome. Thanks, Faust.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.